give you a view of what I think basic science, behavioral science has told us about perhaps building healthier societies and also trying to bridge those gaps in racial and health disparities as well. I want to thank NIDCD and NICHD for the support in allowing me to do this work. But my focus of my research has really been on what is the biological basis of behavior. It's really a simple question that gets at the heart of something quite complex. What I want to try to do is identify some of the true effects of development. In doing so, I think what normal functioning provides insights into is perhaps vulnerabilities of childhood, but also opportunities. And the big picture that I want to present to you today is when you look at many chronic illnesses that are plaguing our society, they derive in large part from poor food choices, and those poor food choices are dictated by our taste preferences. We're eating too much sugar and salt, we're eating too few vegetables and fruits, and the pattern that is rampant in our nation's adult is even evident in our children. So how can we account for patterns of food choice that are so anti-health, and why is it so difficult in changing them? Another way of asking this is, how do individuals in society manage this rich abundance of food that now characterizes this really evolutionary blink of an eye we find ourselves in? I would say that understanding the behaviors of what children are eating, understanding the obesity epidemic must incorporate this biological substrates that underlies the behaviors that we're talking about. And basically, if I had to summarize what I'm going to tell you in the next few minutes, is there really is a mismatch between inborn evolutionary-driven taste preferences and the current food environment. As you learned from Dr. Hayes, we probably evolved in a very fluctuating and uncertain environment where the primary challenge was to obtain enough nutrients while avoiding the poisons in plants, many which taste bitter. And in response to this challenge, we have very elegant biology. We have a very elegant sensory system that detects and prefers this once rare calorie, which was our signal for sweet, and sodium-rich foods that taste sweet or salty, while rejecting that which is a poison, which probably tastes bitter. And so biology, as I'll show you, predisposes children to consume these diets that may lead to obesity. We not only have a mismatch of this evolutionary-born taste preferences in the current food environment, but I would say the other thing that probably comes into more health and racial disparities as well are these food deserts, or also the detrimental consequences of not being exposed to healthy foods early in life. So these senses that I study, the senses of taste and smell, really they are central to probably making the most important decision an animal makes, whether to eat something or to reject it. They're our primary signal of food, which is a basic biological commodity. The receptors aren't just in the oral cavity, they're in the GI system. They're not only gatekeepers, but they're probably warning the GI system of incoming nutrients. But probably what's more important to human behaviors is these senses are sources of extreme pleasure when it comes to sweet and salt, and also pain. The machinery is there and functioning before birth, but babies are born not being miniature adults. There's inborn responses, yet there's inherent plasticity. This area of science has benefited from almost a century-long legacy of basic research looking at function and behavior. And what I want to focus on today is sweet, because I think that really is one of the hot topics right now and one of the biggest challenges. So again, with all science, it's a convergence of finding, and within hours of birth, the baby is a sweet connoisseur. Whether you're looking at how much they consume, they will drink more of a sweetened liquid, they will suck harder on a sweetened pacifier, and the ability to detect sweet is even evident in the premature infant, so the baby is born being able to detect sweet taste. There's a convergence of finding also, and there's also a similarity with other animals in the facial reactivity. You'll get a facial response, and babies will start sucking when something sweet is in the mouth. And also sweet isn't just preferred taste, but it blunts expressions of pain. It's an analgesic for the baby and also for the child. But I can show you all these graphs, but sometimes a picture says 1,000 words. So I phenotype babies and look at their first taste of vegetables and fruits and different tastes. And here's a baby's first taste of a sweet cereal. And there's no one standing behind the camera. I mean, sweet taste is man's oldest reward. It's our taste of pleasure. And you can see this in this child. But I think this also highlights something, who doesn't want to give joy to this baby? And that's what sweets does. So in what really is the strongest age-related difference is children prefer a much more concentrated solution of sweet taste than adults. And it doesn't decline until growth is over, so it declines during mid-adolescence. Just to give you an idea, the average adult, which shouldn't surprise you, the most preferred level of sucrose will be equivalent to about a 0.3 molar. That's what you find in Coke and Pepsi. For children, it's a 0.6. They really are, they really like sweets. And so what's the good news? The baby's born being attracted to the predominant taste quality of human milk, which is its sweetness. And then during periods of growth, it attracted children to the taste of sources of calories, which were most likely fruits, honey, and this was really accelerated during periods of growth. It blunts expressions of pain, and for the rules of all cuisines, like salt, it also makes other aspects of food taste better. It'll block or mask the bitter. So it does a lot of good for the child. But the bad news is I think when one really starts to understand the taste of children, the taste of childhood, you realize their vulnerability is key, is how vulnerable they really are to the current food environment. And I think in understanding this, I know everyone talks about how vulnerable they are to advertising, but their biology really makes them vulnerable to sugar-sweetened beverages and foods that are loaded with added sugars. It's going to be a lot hard for them to say no to those foods. And as I was preparing this talk, I also was thinking, well, you know, you see this biology. Why is, although we've made some improvement with fruits in children, why is it still below recommended levels? And many children aren't getting the necessary servings of fruits per day. And it made me think of, this was the Nutcracker Man, recently had done some work with him. He was discovered by the Leakeys. He's got this big jaw that is really made to eat nuts. And when a recent study by anthropologists at the University of Arkansas looked at his teeth, he wasn't eating nuts, he was eating fruits. And so the big headline was Early Hominids Love Fruit. And so there's a dictum, it was originally made for fish, but it was applied to the Nutcracker Man, and I think it should be applied to when we look at what children are eating as well, is that specialized morphology can allow for a broader diet wherein a species may actively avoid the very foods to which it is adapted when other more preferred resources are available. And so when you look at a gorilla have a forced choice between a leaf and a fruit, they'll always pick the fruit. When we look at the current food environment with children, our refined sugars, supernormal stimuli. First of all, they never chain. The child never learns the different textures of fruits, or that the sweetness of fruit isn't always going to taste a certain way. But based on a lot of issues of inequality, you see sugar-sweetened beverage in certain communities where it's high. Are those children, is it going to be harder for them even to learn to like these other types of foods? Are they just amping the system even more? And then what are some of the epigenetic changes that the animal model studies have shown us due to chronic sugar intake, not only early in life, but in the prenatal period? So I think when we look at healthy foods, we've also got to look at these unhealthy foods, because I think they're competing for the same biological substrates and may actually be modifying them. So for as much as children like sweet, they dislike bitter. And again, it's a very elegant biology. This rejection is protecting them from all of us from ingesting toxins. It's protecting the animal from consuming things and being poisoned. It's protecting the plant who's producing these toxins from being eaten. And what we've been able to show over these years looking at genotype-phenotype relationships is that children have a heightened sensitivity for bitter, and that also changes during mid-adolescent, where you start seeing the adult-like pattern. So you see during childhood, really attracted to that which they need, which is calories, being also more wary of things that taste bitter. So it's always going to be easier to introduce fruits more than vegetables, and it's always going to be easier to introduce orange than green vegetables, and we have data to show that. But again, I think a picture says 1,000 words. So here's this baby's first taste of broccoli. And compare that with sweet. But I think this is what, and he's got the bitter shudder. But he opens his mouth to the next spoonful, which is important because he starts engaging in a lot of other behaviors. And this mother must sign for her baby because then it stops. So you see this, and this biology is the same thing, which I would add, it's not just green vegetables, but it's the same biology underlying the rejection of liquid formulations. Unlike you and I, the better the medicine, the better the poison it is. And unlike you and I, which we will take our pills in tablet form, which encapsulates the bitter, children, until they can swallow a pill, are taking it in liquid form, where taste is the primary issue of compliance. Where we have one sweet receptor, we've got 25 bitter. We really, the child especially, is really a bitter detector and will reject it. This is our challenge, because missing a single dose of a medicine for some children can be life-threatening. So we've got to understand this, not just to get them off to a healthy start, but also to help them comply with medication use. Well, I don't think we're ever going to have children ask you to put broccoli in their trick-or-treat bag. But if this is the bad news, the good news comes from experimental work that shows us how, beginning very early in life, before our first taste of food, that sensory experience can shape and modify what we like, which I think is one of the most fundamental mysteries of human behavior, is why do we like the foods that we do. And I think when you look at this plasticity of these systems, just as the language and learning the language in the first few years, we're also learning about the foods of who we are, which defines all of us as a family and as a culture, is that our biology isn't our destiny. We can learn to like these foods. And so a lot of the work has been focusing on fruits and vegetables, and one of the reasons is when you look at the behavioral or dietary risk factors that contribute to the global burden of disease or mortality, fruits is the number one. A diet insufficient of fruits ranks 1 as the dietary risk factor, and then vegetables, I think, ranks 11. And as I said earlier, children aren't meeting the recommended amounts of both. They're doing better for fruits, but still below for fruits and vegetables. So when one wants to study where it all begins, the earliest information about nutrition is coming from the mother, and that was the focus of has been for the research that I'm doing. And this research that I did really stems from a body of, when I started this, a body of research from other animals, which is a very elegant system in which young mammals are more accepting of foods that contain flavors that were eaten by their mother during pregnancy and lactation. It's a wide range of mammalian species that have been looked at, and it's a very, very sophisticated learning that I hope that only one day maybe the human work can get close to. By following their mothers, this is the first, not the only way, they learn what plants to avoid, what plants to eat occasionally, when plants are at their peak nutritional content, and even what plants to eat when they're sick. It's a very elegant system. The work that I most like is the European rabbit, where they did a randomized controlled trial and they tagged her diet during pregnancy. One group ate juniper berries during lactation, and then there was a control group. And the bottom line is that either exposure to juniper berries in pregnancy or lactation, the young would forage, and those were the foods that they would eat once they left the nest. So what we were able to show is that, like other animals, a variety of flavors of the mother's diet are transmitted to these first foods. So every baby's experience is unique. It's reflecting the diet of their family, of their culture, and that the baby forms memories of the foods that are experienced in both amniotic fluid and the mother's milk. And so we did the European rabbit study in humans, but we used carrots instead. We randomized pregnant women who planned on breastfeeding to drink carrot juice during either pregnancy or lactation. We looked at a variety of behavioral outcomes, facial reactivity, how much they ate, length of feeding. But the bottom line is, if the mother drank carrot juice during pregnancy or lactation, what I have plotted here is a proportional response. The baby ate more of the carrot-flavored cereal when compared to a plain. Mothers thought they liked the food more, and the baby made less facial expressions of distaste while they were eating the carrot-flavored cereal. So just like other mammals, babies will be more accepting of fruits if their mothers are eating more of these food. But if the exposure is during the postpartum period, the mother has to breastfeed in order to have the effect. It's a very simple, elegant, beautiful system. For the baby to learn, the mother has to eat the food for that transmission of knowledge. And it's really a transmission of information that goes well beyond the flavors of the food. It's really giving information about the environment and the culture into which that baby is being born. This isn't unique to humans. I used to always think it was a fundamental feature of mammals until a few years ago a French group tagged the diet of hens with an oil, and they found that it flavored the yolk, and if those eggs were fertilized and they flavored novel foods with that flavor, the offspring would be more likely to accept a novel food. So I think it's a fundamental feature of all vertebrates. It's the first way that we learn about foods. It's not innate knowledge, as Fred Provenza from Fish and Wildlife at Utah State says. It's learned, and it's part of their culture, just like it is for us. So this learning makes evolutionary sense. These are the foods that the mothers eat when she's pregnant and nursing, are the foods that she likes, at the very least the food she has access to, and what mother eats is what baby is going to eat once they're transitioning to the foods of the table. So it's one of the first ways that we learn about the flavors of foods. But it goes beyond that. We learn from other animals that the presence of a food in an environment doesn't mean that it's going to be eaten by the animal. We've got a lot of issues of availability in certain neighborhoods when it comes to fruits and vegetables. But this poison detector, if you will, has to taste the food in order to learn to like it. And the way it does that is through repeated exposure. 8 to 10 days of a baby tasting a food, they'll be more accepting of it. The experience with food variety, just like other animals, babies will learn, and these are just a summary of some of the research that has been done, looking at target foods of fruits and vegetables or variety. Both the breastfed and formula-fed baby learn once they're weaned to solid foods. So how do we learn? Obviously, it begins with mom and from the foods that she eats. We learn through repeated exposure, with flavor variety, with flavor nutrient conditioning. Babies and children are really good at that. And then parental modeling and peer modeling, which are probably more important as the child gets older. But I think what you see, and which is really a fundamental feature of all behaviors, when it comes to feeding, we're building on the familiar, and it's increasing in complexity. Not just the texture of the flavor of the food, but the texture and the context of it. But as I was doing this research for all these years, I think that the group that probably gave me the most information was the control group. And those are the babies that are deprived of these experiences for whatever reasons. Whether it's because of a food desert, whether it's because of the competition or the advertising for other foods that are very, very palatable. And so I think that we've got to look at, and some of the recent work from CDC is if we're focusing on fruit and vegetable, we can see that the intake that's happening during late infancy is really associated with the infrequent intake of these foods at 6 years. We've got this window of birth to 24 months that we're all trying to capitalize in and trying to get babies off to a healthy start. But I would say that as we look at the biology of the system, you cannot feed children separately from their families. We've got to focus on a much bigger, broader issue of the family. So where you start influences where you end up, and I think that the efforts to focus on reducing this disparity from an early age is really key, and I think it's going to have the longest term impact on the health of all Americans. Most children aren't getting the experience to learn to like certain fruits and vegetables. And we know that deprivation is remodeling central nervous system, and we know that it's, as they say, you can teach an old dog new tricks, it's just a lot easier to teach a young one. And I think that really is true when it comes to food habits. So where is the hope? And if you, as I was thinking about it, I think we've got to celebrate parenthood. There are brief periods in life when old routines fall apart, and we all know that advertisers look at the young parent as the holy grail because their buying habits are suddenly in flux, and that usually is around the birth of a child. The same is true for health behaviors. Many women only get to see a physician while they're pregnant. It's really an opportunity. Look at the anti-smoking campaign. Being pregnant and then a parent is probably the strongest motivator to change or modify not only her behavior, but also when you change a mom's behavior, you change the behavior of a family. And so mothers feed their children what they eat. I think we need to improve and celebrate motherhood, improve the dietary habits of women during pregnancy and the postpartum period. And I think we need to understand what I think is a fundamental mystery of human behavior is why do we like the foods that we do? I think that the continued success is really basic research, and I hope what I demonstrated is not just in clinical research, but also animal models is the key to advances and applications. Sometimes through scientific inquiry, biology reveals fundamental principles. There's an elegance and a simplicity in them. And I think one of the simple messages is that if the baby's to learn about the food, the mother has to eat it. I think it's modeling at its very best. And we can't forget that food is much more than a source of calories. We have reward systems that seek out pleasure, which sweet and salt are very tightly linked to, probably the two ingredients in our diet that are giving us the most trouble. They are also our sense of identity, and they are also an example of how we relate to our environment. But I think when we understand this simple taste of childhood, we also realize that children need to be protected. They're vulnerable, especially because of their biology that attracts them to high sweet and salt. And so in looking to the future, I thought I'd look to the past, and Ellen Swallow Richards, which I just recently read her book, was America's first Ph.D. in chemistry. She was the founder of the home economics movement. And science has to apply its knowledge to improve home, for upon the welfare of the home depends the welfare of the Commonwealth. So thank you.